So in chapter 14 we look at exception handling. We're gonna look at the file, how to read and write a file. Okay. So when a program runs into a runtime errors, the program terminates abnormally. We talk about how to handle it. So handle runtime errors so that the program continue to run or terminate gracefully. This is the subject we will look at. So what is runtime errors? Right. So like for example, when you try to divide it by 0, right? That's runtime errors, which it's not logic errors. I mean, it's not the syntax errors, right? So it's the logic errors. So it's happened at runtime. How would you handle that? Right. So syntax errors, the compiler taking care of, right? But for runtime, it's very hard to find. So that's why when you write a program, you have to think about handling this. Now let's look at the exceptions. This is the hierarchies. So we know that the object is the super class, right? And then we have variable extends from object. And we have exception and error classes here, extends from variable. Now this is what we can look at exceptions part, which we can have class not found exception. We may see that a lot when you try to run, right? IO exceptions when you try to read and write a file. That file is not existing. Runtime exception. So this is runtime. We talk about arithmetic. Like for example, you try to divide by 0, right? No pointer exception. We seen that when you try to access something that's not valid. Index of bounds exceptions. Right, you see a lot when you use array, when you loop to the location that over the size of the array, right? Or under the size, right? The illegal arguments, like when you pass something into a method and mismatch, right? The type, and there are more. Okay, these are just some of the examples. So we can look at this part exception. Like the errors, they have linkage errors, virtual machine errors, so those we're not looking at. System errors are thrown by JVM and represented in the error class. Okay, so Java virtual machine, throw that. The error class describes internal system errors. Such errors rarely occur. If one does, there's little you can do beyond notifying the user and trying to terminate the program gracefully. Exception describes errors caused by your program and external circumstances. Okay, so you see that exception is we use for your program, right? The errors is for system errors, right? And these errors can be caused and handled by you, right? The system errors, you cannot do much about it, right? But for your program, you can handle it when there's an errors. So runtime exception is caused by programming errors such as bad casting. So that's another example. Casting type, right? Accessing and out of bounds, array, and numeric errors. Talk about those. Okay, let's look at check and uncheck exceptions. So runtime exception. Error and their subclasses are known as unchecked exceptions. All other exceptions are known as check exceptions. So meaning that the compiler forces the programmer to check and deal with the exceptions. Like for example, when you look at IO exceptions, when you implement that, you require to implement the exceptions. You have to do surrounding by try catch, otherwise the compiler is going to say errors. But for this, you don't need to do try catch, right? We know that we can just do divided, right? So those are unchecked, right? Runtime exceptions are unchecked. The checked, that means like IO exception, you require to implement it. And we gonna see that in example later on. So these are unchecked exceptions. These are checked. Now, look at the syntax. Like I said, you're required to surrounding with try catch exceptions. So, in the method, you're going to say try, and normally you just write the statement right away, right? Without that. But now, if it's checked exceptions, you need to surrounding with try to do this. Like for example, I try to read the file, right? If it's okay, then we don't need to have any handling on the catch exception. But if the file is not existing, then we have to catch and process the exception. It depends on how you want to handle. Maybe prompt the user say the file doesn't exist, something like that. So this is called catching exceptions. Okay, now the difference you see, this is called throws exceptions. Try to invoke method 2. Okay, this is another example beside opening the files, right? Sometimes method 1 is going to invoke method 2, correct? Now, this is talking about checked exceptions. Checked exception means you require to surrounding by try catch. Otherwise, when you try to invoke method 2, the compiler will say errors. Will not allow you to do so. Yes, because method 2 has the keywords those exception declared here. And in method 2, it's happen to do if there's an error occur, it's going to say throw new exception inside. So that means you require to surrounding your try catch, and this is how you implement checked exceptions. So every method must state the types of checked exceptions it might throw. This is known as declaring exceptions. This is an example. The methods, right, state that I want to do IO exception here, and you can state more than one exceptions. So this is called declaring exceptions. When the program detects an error, the program can create an instance of an appropriate exception type and throw it. So this is known as throwing an exception. So let's look at an example in the program. Like for example, we have set radius, and we said we're going to do declaring exceptions here, right? Declaring exceptions, adding throw next to your method, right? Just like this, declaring exception. Normally you just code parentheses here, braces here. Now you add throws, the illegal argument exception here. So if the new radius greater than or equals to 0, so that's fine. We try to see that whenever the user provides a new radius, it has to be greater than 0. Right? Otherwise, it's going to say throw, else, throw, new, the illegal argument exception. Radius cannot be negative, right? So this is you handle it. Like normally when you write a program, you never think about this. This is just like you take care of the user validation, input validation, correct? To make sure that always provide me the positive number when you want to provide the radius for the circle, because there's no such negative radius, right? Now, when you create the method already, though, the one who's going to use it, that means this is called checked exceptions. The one who's going to use the method need to use try, right, statements and catch exceptions. Now, this one has only one exception, then you can only do one catch, the illegal arguments, right, exception. Like we said, we can have more than one exception by separating by commas, right? That in that case, you can do several catches too, based on each exception. So another example here, try to invoke method 1, and method 1 also try to invoke method 2, and method 2 try to invoke method 3. So this is another way. Since you invoke another method that has its own throw exceptions, you can keep catching each exceptions. And of course, the method 3 has to do throws, right, on the method header, right, and then do the throw inside the implementations. Now, when we invoke like this, you see we're going to use a stack to help, because this is the main. The main is not done yet. It's not complete until the last method, method 3, has invoked. So in this case, we're going to use stack to help to push the process of the main thread, and then method 1 thread, method 2 thread, and then you open method 3 thread and then execute it. So you're running 4 at the right, 4 processes. And then after you execute method 3, then you close and then you pop out method 2 and method 1 and then main method. Then program is complete when you invoke this way. The checked exceptions. Like this is a checked exception because the method throws IO exception. So then you need to do try catch IO exception. Java forces you to deal with check exceptions. If a method declares a checked exception, you must invoke the try catch block or declare to throw the exceptions in the calling method. For example, suppose that method P1 invokes method P2, right? P1 invokes method P2, and P2 may throw a checked exception. I think this has to say P2, right? P2 throw and you invoke P2. So there's typo here.